Just us chickens again?
Well, I'm so glad you're here. And Anna's here.
Okay. Hey, do you want me to send out the email invite for this Thursday? I can do that.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay, I'll do that.
I thought you were going to do that. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. And I wrote a note for myself to do the next one.
Okay.
So here's the deal, kids. Peg isn't coming because she thought we would be more candid without her.
Oh my goodness. She doesn't trust us to
What
be
did she
brutal.
want us to do? I mean,
Uh,
what's the assignment?
I will read her words. Did she, does that clarify anything? Just a second. She wants us to take stock of the project overall. I think folks will be more candid if I'm not there, but I hope to learn what they thought and any suggestions or feedback they have.
Wow. Well, tell her we're not afraid of any ghost. She's
So,
in here.
this is being recorded, and I told her I would make a summary of it for her. I thought to start, we could go through the book chapter by chapter. I mean, not, read every word, but kind of to refresh ourselves. Does that make sense?
At least the chapter definitions for what each
Well,
thing
like the
was.
first one is Peg, the second one is Joko. I was just looking at them and
Okay.
to see if it's too much, if it's too little, if it's relevant, if it's whatever we might think. Unless you guys have a different strategy.
Hmm.
But it's easy for me to forget where we've been.
Well, each of these was being recorded anyway, right? So she has the comments that we've made real time while we were doing it.
That's true. But maybe in light of seeing now the whole,
Hmm.
we have a different view of the part. Unless you have a different idea that we could have a general discussion about the whole thing. I don't mean we need to spend the whole time going through it, but maybe just like to refresh, do you think? Would that be helpful?
Just to give a top level overview summary of where we're at with it.
You want
Sure,
to see that?
let's do that.
Okay. Is that good with you, Anne?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is chapter 1. It talks about her experiences in college, her ideas of Zen practice, the farmhouse, graduate school, the learning record, which she developed in graduate school, I think. Okay, any comments about this chapter or how it fits into the whole?
I think it's very interesting. I mean, for me, it fits into the whole in that it seems like this is just, I shouldn't say that. This is a passion project of Peg's. And to me, it's more an autobiography than anything else.
So you're talking about not just the chapter one, but the whole business.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, and chapter one is interesting in that it's the early part of the autobiography.
It's interesting. I guess my starting point with any book of this nature, because ostensibly it's also about explaining Appamata, um, there needs to be that introduction of your key figures. And since Peg is the one driving the cart forward, obviously it starts with her, and I think it helps to give you insight into the person. If you look at most of these, especially the books being written by someone who's writing about something that happened 1,000 years ago, you get some definition or explanation about the person who's writing it and what got them there, or something historical about the main character. So in that sense, I think it works. Um, I kind of saw it as a three-pronged type of thing, where I agree with Anne. Some of this is autobiographical. There's some deeply autobiographical things in there, but it also kind of crosses over into like a memoir genre, um, of what was going on and when, and who the other characters were involved in her life, in her path, and in the realization and the formation um, of Appamata. So I think it was autobiographical, it was memoir, and it's a necessary introduction as to the who, what, and why of this whole deal.
I think it's one person's view of the who, what, and why.
Yeah, I won't argue with you on that one. That's true. And I don't know if she needs to be more explicit in saying that. I mean, we understand that because we're reading it and we have some knowledge of her. But I guess if somebody was just thinking, oh, here's the story of Appamata, there's a little bit more to it, with the tangents. But I found those things interesting too. And I wonder, this just came into my sleep deprived brain. Is there going to be something where maybe as an afterward or a forward, where Flint, the other main contributor to this whole thing, gets to say some words about
Well,
the,
there is a Flint chapter.
but it's not written by Flint.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
I
we'll come.
missed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the answer to your question about that is no.
Hmm.
Wait, the question being, say it again, what the question is.
And how did you see the question being formulated?
What I heard you just say was, will there be a afterword or a forward that is written by Flint?
Okay. And that doesn't exist, but Kim is saying there is a chapter that Flint
There's Flint's
authored.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm seems when you have multiple goals, it makes a book or any kind of project more complicated. And I'm wondering, is the goal here to help someone create kind of something like Appamata, or is the goal to explain to Appamata people now and in the future how we came to be and how we're structured and why. And maybe it can be both.
Right now, I think it's more the second thing though.
That it would be useful for Appamada as opposed to the world in general. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it can leak over into the world, but I think it's something that has a focus on this is what Appamada is, this is how it came to be, this is what you're involved with. And then I think it does have that dual purpose. And I guess whoever's reading it will figure out what their priority of learning or understanding is, but it does have that dual purpose of saying, this is how a Sangha was developed, how it came to be, and here are things that I, Peg Syverson, believe are pertinent and important to creating and maintaining a Sangha.
I've been thinking about this for the last, she wrote me this an hour ago, so I've been thinking of it since then. And as I was driving somewhere, I started thinking about, it seemed to almost be a series of essays. The chapters, rather than flowing into each other, seem to be distinct entities. You know, like usually chapters have more continuity from one to the next. Does this make any sense to the two of you?
Yes.
But here it's more like this is you know, this is Joko, this is Peg, this is Flint, this is the weaving together seems to be kind of not there, which is fine, but it's a different kind of thing than chapters. Like maybe not even using the word chapter, but using something that just like essays, or you know, or just really making it distinct. Like this is a series of parts.
And I kind of got the impression that in Peg's mind, there is a reason and a rationale for part one to go and then part two versus part one and part five and all of that stuff. So
The parts certainly make sense, yeah.
yeah, so I think there is a flow intended in how she's done this. There are some things, and maybe that's something where the flow from the first chapter or first part or whatever into the second one, the transitions are not as obvious or seamless. How like when you go from the first stanza to the second stanza in a poem, you want something that bridges you into that second one, especially if the second one is reinforcing something that the first one made as an initial statement. And what I've seen done before, but this was kind of more like a novel thing, where there was a first chapter, and then there was a page that had some statement or some kind of connective thing to let you know that what you just read is now going to lead you to what's coming next. And very short, just maybe a couple sentences, and then you just dive right in. That might not be appropriate as a writing technique for this type of exercise.
Let's look at how chapter 2 starts, because that's the Joko one.
Well, and we need to see how chapter 1 ends as well.
Oh, okay, I'll go back. So she did say, if I had not, but that dissertation would never have been written if I had not met Joko, to whom we will turn now.
Okay. All right, so she's accomplishing that.
Do either one of you feel like that the few places, there are not many, but the few places in this book where she references her professional accolades seem gratuitous.
Hmm.
Like that last paragraph of chapter 1, where she says, for which I won 2 national awards.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it does to me, it doesn't seem to, it seems mm, to be part of a different solar system, part of a different uh, reason for writing, or
When we're writing poetry, you know, we'll get the criticism that it bumps you.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's something you might bump up against or stumble on because if you just, and here's what I just did in my head, I read this. In his lab, he trained his graduate students and me in rigorous critical thinking of creative approaches to research. All of these influences factored into my dissertation, The Wealth of Reality, an Ecology of Composition. But that dissertation could never have been written if I had not met Joko, to whom we will turn now. It doesn't hurt to leave out the national awards thing.
it sounds a little self-congratulatory to me. It doesn't really, yeah, it's kind of a eddy in the stream of the flow of the narrative to me.
And this is why we wear water wings. That's something for her to consider, I think. But I think if it's in there because that's how she wants to present herself in the situation. And maybe it's to let someone know that her credentials, her bona fides are serious. Um, but I think if you read the book, you get that anyway.
In a more subtle way, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it needs to be there. And I would agree with Anne that it's a bit of a bump, you know, when you read it there.
I think of it sometimes in art as something that catches more attention than you want it to. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
Okay, let's go to 2.
Can we make it smaller so we're seeing, yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a neat story, and also it's always nice to hear people's first Zen interaction. Like, and you were talking the other night about your interaction, with Ed Brown and finding the book and going to Tassajara, and I
Yeah.
I just love those stories.
Does she talk later in this chapter about what Joko's teaching is? I mean, she talks about this um, experience of meeting and being with Joko, but I don't remember her ever really talking about, okay, here was my takeaway from Joko's teaching. But maybe that's not what she's trying to do. She's just trying to say, this was the next phase of my life.
I think she's looking at, yeah, this is the next phase. This is that next step that I took along the path. And then she starts
Right.
to make some statements about Joko's past.
Right. Regularly. Yeah, she gives this history of Joko's. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and it shows that camaraderie. Where I just saw, oh, there it was, the parallels between the two of them.
Right, right.
And she is giving, some insight into Joko's teaching by what she responded to, being an acolyte, if you will, of Joko.
Mm, I would make this chapter a lot shorter. I mean, this seems to me to go into a lot of detail that, if it was by itself and you were just reading, like Ed said, an essay about what was my experience being with Joko Beck about. But
Well, but then again, I think you said it clearly, and this is definitely an autobiographical chapter.
you're right. You're right. And I think, yeah, yeah,
I don't
that's how
know.
it seems to me.
I
So,
don't know that autobiography is really was her intent in doing this project. So
No.
you agree with me, Anne?
Oh, I don't think it's at all her. I mean, my impression of how she describes this is that it's a manual for people wanting to develop sanghas and to give them an idea about how Appamada was developed. I don't think, I've never heard her reference, this is my gift to the world about my experience in life.
So I think one could think that there's like a conflict there.
I see them as different threads. Yes.
so yeah, this thread, to kind of stick with the intent, if you will, should stop it, Ed, could be more about what the teaching experience was with Joko, um, more than how she spent her evenings and afternoons and those types of things. Because even if it's not autobiographical, it is memoirish, if that's a new word. And I would think, let's turn now to Joko. How did Joko influence her and help lead her further in the path to develop a sangha? And that, I think, by definition, would have to include more of what Joko's teachings were and her perspectives.
And not just a sangha, but a unique sangha.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and to make some connections between what she experienced with Joko and what she eventually created. I mean, obviously she wasn't thinking about that, so but looking back, I mean, she feels like this is important in developing this particular type of Sangha and how.
Mm. Yeah, now that she's down into this part of the chapter, there's a little bit more about stuff with Joko. Like a few paragraphs up, it was saying that she was at a conference and asked who her teacher was. She said Joko, and other teachers were saying that Joko was vast. Um,
I guess what I'm looking for is more. This really planted the seed for Appamada, her interaction with Choco,
yeah,
and hearing more about that seed, and maybe we can pick it out of it because we know kind of, but maybe I mean that's one of the troubles that the stuff we know is keeping us from being really seeing what's in the book. But would someone get that, or
I think it's there, but you have to wade through a lot of stuff to get there. Um, in,
Yeah,
in the beginning, at least. So maybe it is a matter of they tell you at writing, you have to get adept at killing your darlings.
yeah,
So maybe some of the story of her in the beginning of this chapter can be distilled or put somewhere else, or put it as an essay or something later, as an afterword in the book. But yeah, I like how you phrased that, Kim, that this would be more pertinent of how did Joko influence the creation of Appamada, and what was it that was different or significant or moving Joko to take a step to the left or to the right from what's traditionally looked at as teacher-student creation of a community, of a sangha.
yeah, and it would be kind of a reflection on all of this
Mm-hmm.
from Peg, as opposed to just I'm writing down what I thought. I'm writing down what happened every day. I'm writing down, I had no thought of starting a sangha, but in retrospect, what were the things in that experience that were seeds?
Um, I don't know if I've told you guys this story, but every year I'd show my photographs to this wonderful guy, Henry Holmes Smith. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Mm-mm.
He was actually Jerry Ilsman's teacher
Oh
at the
wow.
Indiana University. And I'd show him my photographs every year. And one year he said, "What gives you permission to do this? Not to show me your photographs, but to do these
Yeah.
particular pieces." And I thought about it all year long. And then the next year I showed him my new work. And I said, "I thought all year, I worked all year on that thing you said." He said, "What did I say?" And I told him, he said, "I didn't mean anything by that." But,
Oh,
but anyway,
I love that.
Joko really gave Peg permission to do Appamada. Don't you think?
See, that's huge. That statement right there is huge.
And
Where do you get that, Kim? Just from a general,
not from the book.
oh, well, that
That's,
would be nice
that's
to
my
have.
understanding.
That would be nice to have in the book.
Yeah.
That's why we're not Austin Zen Center.
Mm.
I mean, it was also Flint's influence of the more humanistic psychological approach, but we're not married to forms as being the end, end. And the relational aspect too. So we want more, I think, in this. We want less of the story and more of how did how was Joko unique, and how did that, you know,
How did that experience with Joko later manifest
yeah,
as Appamada?
Yeah. How
I
did
mean,
you
what,
build that blueprint to make the foundation for Appamada?
good.
And
Should we go to chapter 3?
yeah.
yeah,
And here's the Flint chapter.
go back just a little bit. Let me read that last sentence again. Okay.
But see, yeah, go back again because here's where, I like how Flint has put in here, blah, blah, blah. This story is not meant as a conclusion to a successful experiment, nor is it a comparative argument for a new or better spiritual community.
I
And then,
think,
go ahead, Anne.
well, I think this speaks to me directly to the difference between Peg and Flint and how they see Appamada. That Peg sees it as a wonderful, is my impression is Peg sees it as a wonderful, certainly evolving and growing, but the way, a good way, a better way. And I think Flint sees it as a way.
Well, he says that in the last two sentences. It is just a wholehearted and imperfect record of where we have come from and where we seem to be going.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, boom. That's a drop the mic statement right there.
Yeah.
And Peg has said things which lead you to understand this is a living document. It's not cast in stone like the 10 things coming off Mount Sinai. Um, but I don't think it's said as explicitly as this.
Well, there seems to be, I think that's an important issue. Is Appamada better or is it just different?
And does that answer matter? Is not the experience the crux of the whole thing? What is our experience in Appamada?
I think it matters. I think it matters how the people that are leading, that are the roots of the organization, see the organization.
Okay, I was just testing you, Anne. You passed. Good answer.
I I mean, ultimately, I agree with you that it's, what is your experience
And the
of
only reason
Appamada?
I
Yeah.
bring that up is I was reading something the other day, and what I saw was that the focus was more on the definition versus the experience.
Mm,
And then I remembered something that Flint had told us a story once when he was with Blanche, and she was introducing him to, God help me, I forget, but Flint said he asked a question, and there was a pause, and the teacher who responded back to him said, "That's such a good question. I don't think it deserves an answer."
mm.
Well, I think it seems like an important issue. I was just
Yeah.
remembering a woman who did these nice landscape paintings, and they kicked her out of the painting curriculum and sent her to art education.
You gotta love life.
If you're
That's so
not
funny.
doing, our kind of painting, uh, you don't belong here. So, but that seems to be a question, and I know it's an attitude that many people uh, in the AZC world, in the San Francisco Zen Center world, believe that their way is the good way,
Mm.
and and certainly Theravadins believe their way is the right way, and so it seems like an important issue that Flynn is touching on here.
I think it's individuals. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say Theravadan think their way is best. I think that there are individuals in whatever group that you choose to examine
Sure.
that think their way is the way. And then there are people within every group that think this is one way.
Well, and I think it is an important point to make that this is a way and that we don't get caught in that dogmatic stuff like a lot of Western religious dogma. If you're not a Methodist, you're the son of Beelzebub, and you're wrong.
And you're going to hell.
Well, that goes without saying. Please.
I think what we're pointing to is an area that would be good for some more discussion in the book.
Yeah.
Medicine.
And there's certainly a correlation like Flint to this John Gladfelter as Peg is to Joko.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
And Flint just has a different style of
Yeah.
expressing and writing where he tells that one story. Geez, go up a little more. Ah, there it is.
Yeah.
Where he's saying it turns out he was a Zen master of sorts disguised as a psychotherapist. Later in our time together, I showed him pictures of me in robes for my ordination ceremony. His only comment was, "It will be interesting to see how you grow into them." That encouragement is what I now experience as the unfolding of my vow, Now, that in those, 4 or 5 sentences, short paragraph, Peg has pages that make that same point, but she has pages of saying that where you kind of get lost sometimes in reading about the experience or the things that were in her mind that morning or that evening, where this gets right to it and still gives credit to the person and things that were instrumental in making this thing be what it was and helping him to be what he was. It is.
Yeah, I mean that sentence, that encouragement is what I now experience as XYZ. it connects this past with the present. And that seems really helpful in helping people make connections between, okay, we're saying this experience in your life was a seed,
Hmm.
but what was the fruit?
And it's just ripe with such an incredible explanation of what life is, whether you're on a path or not. It will be interesting to see how you grow into. I mean, that's a Pulitzer Prize winning statement right there. And it just
Right.
so much stuff. The depth in that is beautiful.
So I don't think, I know I don't. I need it said as I'm reading. You know, the idea that well, this will make sense to you, you know, next semester or something. That never worked for me. When you grow older, when you have kids, you'll understand why we're doing this. You know, all
Yeah. Yeah, wait until you're older, young man.
And it's a little smoother. I mean, his writing is a little smoother about making the connection between I'm describing my past, I'm describing experiences that I had, and I'm bringing them forward. And here's what, you know, I'm using my past experiences to describe how um, Appamada, what Appamada is.
it was a little bit goofy that Flint's condensing his whole talk into one chapter, and Peg is, you know, spreading it out over the whole book. So
It doesn't seem goofy. It seems autobiographical.
the book,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
It almost seems like it's looking for a chapter like me. Here I am. Here's my background. Yada yada yada. And then the other prime influencer was Joko, and here's about her and her teachings and how it led me, down the path. And then here's Flint, who was a hand in hand, a warm hand and warm hand contributor to moving this thing into actualization. And then after that, maybe it would be here's us, here's how we moved forward with this thing.
I think that would be a different book.
Okay, I have a rich fantasy life. That would just pop into my head. Sorry.
I mean, that would be interesting, but yeah, I mean, I think all the talk about spiral dynamics and, um, architectural ways of knowing, and that's all Peg. And I'm sure she's talked with Flint about it, and I'm sure he's had input, but that's not, I don't think that's his vision and process.
Well, and see, now we get to something that's, I don't know how you make that decision.
Mm,
Because there's a lot of stuff in there, like the spiral dynamics and some of the learning techniques and stuff that appeal to the geeky side of me
mm.
and the side of me that studied psychology in college. But is that going to be a primary moving force in the creation and utilization and value of the book? I don't know. And it's up to Peg, I think, to make that decision and roll the dice on which way to go with that. Because there are going to be people, their eyes are going to glaze over when they get to some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and how much of it is more than just this is one person's um, journey to creating a sangha, a very individual effort. Well, not an, that's not the right way to say that, but one person's journey um, that included other people and lots of other things, but um, it's basically one person's story. And it's not how important is all that spiral dynamics and um, her descriptions of her experiences during the session at Austin Zen Center in helping someone build their own sangha. Or, and I keep coming back to that because that's what I've heard her say that she felt like this book was.
Well, I've heard her say both, that it's to give people at Appamada understanding of how it was constructed, and if someone else wants to build an Appamada-like place, it would be of value to them.
Mm,
Yeah, I can see how it's both things, duality. It's two gums in one. Um,
But still, what's needed to do those two things?
that's the crux.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that what she wrote was what she needed to write, but not necessarily, she knows that it's not necessarily what is needed in the end.
Well, and this might be, I mean, and what we've looked at so far, this might be a good way of saying just go back and take a temperature read on each chapter and say, here's my goal. And does the chapter efficiently and effectively move that goal forward? And to what level do I need to put all of the nitty gritty details and backstory behind it? You know, is systems dynamics something that I need to explain with charts and graphs and 8 by 10 glossy pictures with writing on the back? Or can I make enough of a statement of what his intent was, make the reference where applicable, and leave the reference points for someone to dig into it deeper on their own?
yeah.
Ed, you talked the other day about making 250 photos. Was it of the march?
Oh, yeah.
And
Actually,
you needed to take those photos to get the ones that said something, right?
yeah. But no one will ever see outside of those 18 that I ended up posting any of that other stuff. And I don't need to explain why I took picture 127 and picture 128 or picture 145. You know, the thing was here was the march, here was the purpose with that hands off, and here are images which reflected people's involvement and sentiment connected to it. And I think the pictures were effective.
But you had an intention. You had a purpose that you were working toward. It wasn't bifurcated.
I'm not old enough to bifurcate. I think you have to be over 80 and show your driver's license. Um,
Or maybe it always is, who knows? We're complex.
Should
we
we go
are,
to the next chapter?
yeah.
I'm gonna go get some tea.
I do love seeing the old pictures.
Yeah, I remember I was bothered here knowing who the I was.
Hmm.
That's true. That's true because you were just talking Flint was talking about I, and it was very clear he was describing his experience. But
This is Flint also.
oh, it is.
It is, yeah, because Blanche was his teacher.
Oh, right, right,
I'd
right.
like to see it, Flint colon finding a teacher or something here.
Oh, yeah, good, 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 good. Yeah, wholeheartedly.
But then don't you think you'd need to do that with Joko Peg finding teacher?
Maybe that would be a nice parallel.
Yeah, it would.
Or not make it a whole nother chapter, but I don't know.
Just for a heading, just so it's really clear.
And see, I think it deserves its own thing as a chapter, but I like making that distinction for clarity. And that same way for Peg to make that distinction of her time with Joko. And it's interesting that both of them ended up with women teachers. And just to see what the impact of those teachers was on them. Um,
Mm.
hmm. Yeah, if nothing else, though, I think finding a teacher or Flint colon finding a teacher is quite significant and necessary at that point.
Yeah, because this chapter feels much more like what Peg was describing with Joko. This kind of um, describing this minute by minute experience, and I was uncomfortable, and I was in a state of shock, and
Yeah.
I had breakfast, and then I went to the bathroom.
Anything more about the Joko chapter? I mean, the Blanche chapter.
I don't think so.
I remember it very well. It was
Yeah,
really.
he's a very evocative writer.
I'm sorry, what, Anne?
Flint is a very evocative writer. What comes directly after? What is the next chapter? And so we brought back to Peg. Okay.
See, that's another reason why it would have been really nice to see the Flints in the last chapter, because this one. So
Yeah, maybe there should be like a subtitle or a subheading for all of the chapter. I mean, instead of just Peg, it should be Peg, the academic years, or
Or you can say like Peg and Joko Beck, Flint and
right.
Blanche Hartman, or Peg and John Slatton, but connect what's in there and what's the motivation behind this particular chapter and how it affects each individual.
I think that helps the book flow more rather than just saying Peg, boom, here we are again in Peg's life. We're just gonna trundle through it. But what's going on?
and someone might want to skip that chapter if what they're about is building a Zen center, or at least knowing that this is going to be about academic career, teaching classes, if it's going to be about that, then maybe you could just skim through that.
And maybe the subheading could be a little more connected to how to create a Sangha like this, something like PEG, um, the academic influences,
Yeah,
or
Peg and John Slatton, The Academics of Human Interrelationships.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, yeah, I do like that um, idea, Kim, because I've done that in things I've been reading where it got to a particular point and I'm like, I'll come back to that. I think that's a good idea. Or if you start reading it and you realize that I just can't fathom all of this stuff, systems, spiral dynamics and stuff. So let me just move on and see what else happens next.
Right, right. Or maybe it should be dated. Maybe the subheading should be dates from this date to that date. I don't know.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Hmm.
Because it doesn't, I mean, Peg, and then this chapter about what happened to her, what her experiences were during this time doesn't really make, to me, it doesn't really make a connection between what her purpose is. It's just a description.
I would, can you go back up some, Kim? Because if she feels compelled, like Live Oak Zen, to say something about it, I would opt to condense this, radically condense this. There's no disrespect, but why do I care what age Ben was at when this whole thing got started? Um, but if the real purpose of this is that you were going to a particular church with or without your son at a particular time, let's state that and move on to what that really means, or where you were getting to with that, without all the extra stuff in there. And it's, I don't want to call it fluff, but it's semi extraneous. It can be condensed, I guess is the best way that I can say it, so that you get more to the heart of the matter. Um,
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of interesting tidbits,
mm.
but it doesn't move the story forward. I mean, there are interesting little details, but
But see, and here she's telling a story. So if she was on stage telling a story, this might be something to try and pull your audience in at a verbal level. Um, but I don't know that this needs that type of exposition um, to get to the point of another experience that was moving you on to how to create um, a Zen, with whether Unitarianism had anything to do with anything.
yeah, and the same, I would say the same thing about the facing page.
Nice house, though.
It's lovely. I don't know, I still feel really torn about, well, really torn, that's a little dramatic. Um,
I know
about
CPR.
what's the purpose of the book? What's the purpose of the book? Is it for Peg to download all of her experiences to date related to everything?
What purpose would you like the book to be?
I think it's more autobiographical.
No, but
I wouldn't read it. I don't read autobiographies. But I wouldn't read a manual of how did this Sangha come to be in light of maybe you would like to make one like it. I wouldn't read either one of those things, but I'm a very narrow-minded reader.
Wow. Don't be so harsh. Just call yourself picky and be done with it.
Picky. I'm very picky. I have my preference.
suppose you wanted to build a Zen center and you wanted it, you just had a little inkling of what Joko was about, maybe, and what Appamada is about, and you wanted to learn more. Then you would read it. But what part of it would really help you?
It wouldn't help me knowing about the new HVAC system.
I like that. So here's where it can fall over into the realm of memoir, and where if you're writing a memoir to get somebody's interest and hold it, you do need, number one, what's the point? Number two, how do you put one or two items of interest in there to move your point forward without getting somebody slogged down in your personal viewpoint, or day 12 I did this, day 13 I did this type of thing. And that's why memoirs are so doggone hard to write, ones that are interesting. So here again, I think that question needs to be asked: what is the point of the book at this chapter, at this nexus? And what can I say? It's like suddenly I found myself in this big house, and I was all alone with a 14-year-old. But nonetheless, I still had the inkling or the itching to do something in a Sangha-like community, and then put something, that's semi-interesting relative to that without all of the details. And it's like Saturday we sat down, did some acid, and I realized afterwards that, we could just go to a Vietnamese restaurant, eat some really hot food, and get inspiration. We didn't need to do LSD. Something that makes people go, what the heck? But keeps their interest, without getting slogged down in some of the internal dialogue. That was the word I was looking for. There's a lot of internal dialogue in there that can be condensed and or left out. There's some stuff that she says further on in some other chapters upcoming where the internal dialogue was kind of fascinating, when she was saying they were talking to her and telling her to do this or do that. That level of internal dialogue is like, are you talking to spirits? You got to be kidding me. This is how it came across. Or was this just all the tendencies and fragmentations of your mind?
Yeah. Yeah, I think more and more that having knowing why you're writing this book will help streamline. Because then you can ask yourself, does this passage serve that why?
And how much internal dialogue and exposition defines and explains the why?
Right.
Because it is pertinent in places. It is pertinent all along, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a lot to get through.
And what's interesting is I think like the three of us have a different vested interest in this as well as background, where if somebody was coming to this cold who didn't have any experience with a flint or with a peg, how is that going to be received? Will it make an impact? And you can only guess, but you can make an informed guess in that purpose also.
That's who needs to be reading this book. And I guess that's the point of an editor.
There you go.
I did photos of the Twin Towers that I have right up there. Someday I'll show those to you. Looking through photos, I found that I had photographed them and then I
Wow.
manipulated them and made a series of pictures.
You weren't, were you actually there?
No, no.
Okay.
I mean, I was not when it happened. No.
So this is interesting that she's talking about, I began training seriously in a traditional Japanese Zen way because she's come from Joko. And it seems sort of disjointed. I'm having a hard time following. I got this influence from this person and it was pretty iconoclastic. And then I went this other way. And maybe she addresses that further on about, well, I was iconoclastic and then I was traditional and I came to see that there's a middle way or something like that.
I just think she doesn't, at this point yet, explicitly detail what that thread is. And maybe there is some point where there's that summation that says, I was a teenager. I was reading Hermann Hesse and something clicked in my brain and
Right.
I ended up reading the Bhagavad Gita and then I got involved with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and TM, and that took me to a certain point, and something still wasn't fulfilled. There was still a hunger gnawing at my belly, and how
Very good.
huh?
Very good. Very good.
Yeah, and then I read Tony Parsons, The Open Secret. Finally, I had a porterhouse steak at Apamata.
I went to Toastmasters and found my true calling.
Yep, with barbecue sauce.
And to me, we're starting to get into the weeds here. And I appreciate that geeks like to be in the weeds, but it's heavy going.
Well, and if she does get into the weeds, and I think at some point she's going to inevitably get into that, but you do something like what Alan Watts did. He'll make some kind of overarching statement or pose a particular question, and then he'll start to examine that. He'll get you in the weeds. He'll get you deep in the weeds, but then he'll find a way without keeping you there too long to pull you back up to get a breath of air
Mm.
and make a statement of So this is what we were getting to in
Right.
the process. And you can't take too long with that. You know, it's like free diving. You stay under too long and you're doomed. But if you really want to see some of the marvels of the ocean, you got to dip your head below the water. So here might be another instance where she's got to look at what was the point of this chapter and where are my darlings that I need to kill.
Yeah, this is a long section where she's in Great Vow. And I would definitely take out the recipe.
Blueberry boy bait? That sounds like something from a porno movie.
I know. I
So
just,
Kim goes back up to it.
I don't get it.
Ah,
I don't think this is moving us forward any way at all.
A long chapter.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. It gets you submerged too long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all this stuff, my memory of all the stuff about the Jizos and her figuring out how to do screen printing or something, and how many Jizos they eventually sent, and what a good job they did. It's another section that to me is a bump.
Hmm.
It's like this is digging pretty deep into what you did every day there and kind of what you feel like you accomplished, but it's kind of an eddy.
And I wouldn't take it out, but I would definitely condense.
Hmm. Oh my goodness, we're back to Flint, huh? No.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
That's a little jarring.
I thought he pretty much determined Blanche as his teacher in the previous.
I thought it was sort of, he was thinking about it, but he didn't make it formal.
I say.
Look at all those nice people.
Hmm. Well, is this the right spot for that particular chapter?
I think I would have put it at the end of the other Flint chapter.
Oops. Hang on one second. Yo, are you here for the car? I'll be right back.
I'm gonna take a little break too. Bye.
What I'm wondering, Ann, is this is we're near the end of the first part, and then the second part is Appamata. Would we want to continue this discussion next week?
I missed that question, sorry.
Would we want to continue? We're about at the end, and then ordinary mind is the way. So would we want to, and then the second part is Appamata here.
Book 2.
Hmm,
I don't know.
5th. It might be hard for me to do that on the 5th, next
Oh.
Monday, because I'll be doing stuff with my brother.
I see. Anne, how do you feel? Rather than starting something new.
I think we want to finish doing this, though.
Yeah, I guess so. We've started it and Peg has requested it and
We only have 3 chapters that are up that we can look at now. Well, actually, I have the other ones up here. I can get to them, but we only have 14 minutes.
yeah.
Well, I would definitely vote that we find a way to continue this conversation.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
I'm willing to do that.
I'm going to stop the recording, and then I want to ask you guys 2 questions.
Okay.
Just a second. Pause.
There's Eric.